Lone Butte, Wyoming Territory. Autumn, 1884. The wind moved like a slow knife across the dry skin of the plains, lifting red dust and the brittle scent of coming frost. Out past the reaches of Dry Creek Town, where the land opened wide and unkind, Willa McCrae was branding a stray yearling that had broken the fence again. She worked alone. She always had. 32 and lean as a fence rail, Willa moved with the kind of patience a woman learned from years talking to horses more than people. Her father had left her the land, her brothers the debts, and the wind the rest. No kin, no husband, just the sound of hooves and the burn of labor in her hands. That morning, the hammering of hooves wasn't hers. She looked up from the branding iron as a dust cloud came riding over the ridge. A giant of a man rode in, shoulders broad as a barn beam, the muscles in his arms roped like saddle leather. When he dismounted, the ground responded like it knew who it carried. "Miss McCrae," he said, removing his hat. She straightened slowly, her eyes narrow beneath the brim of her hat. "You're Cain." She'd seen him once from a distance, said to be the biggest man west of the Sweetwater. Seeing him up close, she believed it. "Garrett Cain," he nodded. "Cane Ridge Ranch." She wiped her hands on her trousers. "I know the name." He took a step closer, voice like a slow-moving river. "I won't take your time lightly. What I came to say, I mean plain." The wind fell still between them. "I need a woman," he said, "and you need strong sons." For a long moment, Willa didn't move. The colt beside her snorted and tugged the rope. Then she said, "That so?" "It is." He held her gaze like a man who had never learned to lie. She didn't look away, but the iron cooled behind her, forgotten in the dirt. "You came all this way to propose a transaction?" "Not a transaction," Garrett said. "A partnership. I've got land, stock, work that won't outlive me unless there's someone to carry it. You got grit and nothing tying you down but pride. You keep your horses. I keep my cattle. We make something that holds." Willa said nothing. She just looked at him. Like a Mustang deciding whether to bolt, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page. "I wrote it down. Simple terms. You read it. You think on it." She took the paper but didn't open it. "You know where I ride." He nodded once, mounted, and was gone. The dust settled behind him. The colt pulled at the rope again, but Willa didn't notice. She was still holding the paper. The lantern on her table flickered as the wind ran along the edges of the roof. Willa sat with the paper unfolded in front of her, elbows on the table, her face still as stone and lit by flickering lantern light. The handwriting was neat, plain. The terms were clear, separate rooms. Her freedom to keep working horses. Household needs provided. No talk of love, but no expectation of submission either. Respect. Structure. Room to grow. She lit the stove and made coffee she didn't drink. By dawn, the paper was folded again. She saddled her mare and rode east. The Cane Ridge house sat nestled between two hills like it had grown out of them. Big timbers, fresh painted shutters. Not fancy, but firm. Garrett Cain was in the yard by the barn, splitting fence rails. He looked up as she rode in. Willa swung down and tossed the reins across the hitch post. I read it. Garrett wiped his hands on a rag. "And?" She handed the paper back, now signed. "You get your wife Cain. But I got terms." He nodded once. "Let's hear 'em." "I keep my horses. My name stays mine until I say otherwise. And I sleep in my own room till I don't." He gave no argument, just said, "Fair." She looked him square. "And you don't speak for me in town. I don't need a man to give me standing." "Understood." Willa exhaled slow. "Then we're agreed." Garrett offered his hand. She took it. 2 weeks, he said. "Reverend'll make it legal." 2 weeks, she repeated. He looked at her, not smiling, not hard. "You won't regret this." She looked past him to the land. "That makes one of us." The morning of the wedding came quiet and cold. Dry Creek's little white church held only a handful of souls. The blacksmith, the schoolmarm, a few ranchers who came for the spectacle. No flowers. No music, just boots on pine floors and the sound of a minister clearing his throat. Willa wore a navy dress she'd sewn herself. Her boots were polished, her eyes were steady. Garrett stood beside her in a clean coat and a dusted hat held to his chest. No vows were exchanged beyond what the Reverend required. No kiss either. Just a nod, a signature, and the knowledge that both had walked into this with eyes open. She rode beside him the Cain Ridge after the service. 2 horses, 2 riders, one silence between them. At the house, he carried her saddlebag up the stairs without asking and stopped at a room with east-facing windows. "Yours," he said. Willa stepped inside. The bed was made. A small desk sat by the window. A lamp. A quilt folded neatly at the foot. "You did all this?" "Figured you'd want space to yourself." She nodded once. "I do." That night, they ate stew by lamplight. He asked about her horses. She asked about his cattle. They spoke in short lines, like men fencing a field. Simple, careful, without wasted motion. Before bed, he paused at the stairs. "If you ever change your mind about the room," he said, "you just tell me." She didn't answer. He didn't wait. The wind picked up again that night, brushing against the windows like an old dog asking to come inside. And for the first time in 10 years, Willa McCrae slept under a roof that wasn't only hers. The days settled into rhythm. Willa rose with the sun, fed the horses, mucked stalls, stretched fence wire. Garrett worked cattle, managed deliveries, kept the books tight and clean. They met for supper without needing to speak about it. He cooked more than she expected. She fixed the pump when it clogged. They gave each other space like it was something sacred. Some evenings they read. He favored a worn journal filled with maps and figures. She read dime novels and made no apologies for it. One morning she found a new hitch rail set outside her barn. She hadn't asked for it. "That from you?" Garrett didn't look up from oiling a saddle. "Thought you could use it." She nodded. "I could." She planted a row of wildflowers along the side of the bunkhouse without telling him. A week later, she noticed he'd cleared the weeds around them. They didn't talk about those things. But when he returned late one night from driving cattle, boots caked in mud and a cut on his cheek, she poured him coffee without asking. "That from a steer?" Gate chain snapped. Took the blow instead of the gelding. She pressed a clean cloth to the gash. "Could have been worse." He nodded. "Could have." When he reached up to hold the cloth, his hand brushed hers. They both paused. Then she stepped back. He didn't say a word. But the next day, she found an old rocking chair on the porch. It had been scrubbed clean, the joints tightened. The evenings grew quieter after that, but not empty. The first sign was a snapped fence post near the north boundary. Willa found it before sunup, the wire sagging like a tired mouth. She rode the line and saw fresh tracks, boots and hooves. Too close to be accidental. Garrett met her at the gate when she returned. "North fence?" She nodded. "Somebody rode through. Twice, maybe more." He rubbed his jaw, quiet. "Boone's crew's been grazing close." "Close ain't over, not yet." That night, he took a rifle down from over the mantel and cleaned it with slow, deliberate hands. Willa watched from the kitchen. "We expecting company?" "Not tonight, but soon." Elias Boone doesn't believe in fences that weren't built by his hand. Willa set a second cup on the table. Then we watched the line. They rode it together the next morning, rifles slung and silence thick. 2 days later, Boone rode up the road himself. Elias Boone was a lean man with sharp boots and a preacher's voice. He tipped his hat and didn't smile. "Evening, Cain." Garrett didn't dismount. "Boone, heard you married the McCrae girl. Didn't figure she'd tie herself to a man." Willa said nothing. Boone smiled at her anyway. "Must be getting tired of all that independence." Garrett's jaw set like stone. "You got something to say about land, say it. I got a deed says that north pasture's mine. Been looking at it real close." Then bring it to the judge. Boone leaned on his saddle horn. That ain't how things usually get settled out here. It is on my land. Their eyes held like drawn iron. Boone finally tipped his hat again. We'll see. When he rode off, Willa could feel the storm behind him. He won't go to court, she said. No, he'll come back with force. Garrett looked at her, voice low. And I won't let him take what's mine. Willa looked out at the pasture, then back to the man beside her. Then you won't stand alone. The next week brought no peace. Boone's men rode near the line daily, not crossing, but close enough to see their rifles, close enough to leave boot prints just outside the boundary. Garrett locked the barn at night. Willa started keeping her Colt 36 on the mantel instead of tucked in a drawer. They didn't talk about fear. They just made coffee stronger and slept with boots close to the bed. Then, on a Sunday morning that smelled of ash and cold dew, Boone rode in with 2 men behind him. Last chance, he said, reins loose in one hand. You sign the deed, or you answer for trespass. Garrett stood in the doorway, unarmed but unshaken. You come to my land with threats, Boone. That's your answer. Willa stood behind him, arms crossed. Boone smirked. You gonna hide behind your wife now, Cain? She ain't behind me, Garrett said. She's beside me. Boone spat, turned, and rode off without another word. That evening Garrett laid out extra ammunition on the table. Willa loaded shells without being asked. They'll come after dark, she said. Likely. He looked up. You don't have to be here when they do. She finished loading, snapped the cylinder shut, and said, I married this land same as you did. I'm not backing off the line now. They waited on the porch as the sun bled out across the ridge, lamps unlit, house dark behind them. The first shot came at full dark, a warning. Willa ducked instinctively, then rose slow with her pistol drawn. Garrett stepped off the porch and returned fire, one clean shot that cracked the silence open. 3 figures moved in the brush. One retreated. One fired again. Willa fired back, missed, and ducked behind the rocking chair. Boots thundered to the side barn, 2 riders flanking. Garrett moved fast, cutting one off at the pump house. Then came a sound like thunder. Boone's rifle. Garrett stumbled back, shoulder bleeding. Willa rose and fired once, then twice. Boone's shot missed, her second didn't. He went down hard. The others scattered. Silence returned in pieces. Garrett stood, clutching his arm. You hit? Willa ran to him, checked his side, eyes scanning for worse. Through the shoulder. Not deep. He nodded once. You got Boone. She looked at him for a long second. I saw you fall, thought it was done. He placed a bloodied hand over hers. You stood your ground. She didn't answer, just held his hand tighter. That night they didn't sleep. They sat at the kitchen table, blood-stained cloth on his shoulder, rifle propped nearby, the windows dark and quiet once more. Outside, the wind finally calmed. Inside, something else began to settle. Not safety, not peace, but belonging. The night after the fence-line standoff, while the fire crackled low and the blood had been cleaned from Garrett's shoulder, Willa sat on the porch steps with her boots off, feet bare against the cold wood. Garrett eased himself down beside her, moving stiffly. He said nothing at first. Then, softly, she asked, Why me? He looked out at the dark pasture for a long time. When I was 22, I drove cattle from Abilene to Montana. 3 brothers went with me. None of them came back. Willa didn't move. We bought this land with what was left, built the ridge, built the fences, thought I was building something for us. He paused. The fire popped inside. But I just kept building alone. She glanced at him. There was no one else? There was a woman once. Before the ridge. She wanted Sunday dresses and neighbors and a house with curtains. I told her I could give her land. That wasn't what she needed. Silence stretched. "I ain't good with people," he said. "Ain't soft. Ain't clever. But I saw the way you looked at a broken horse, and the way you held your ground with Boone." He finally turned to meet her eyes. "I don't need someone to save me. I just needed someone who wouldn't leave." Willa's voice was quiet. "That's not the same as wanting someone." "I know," he said, "but I do. I want you, not just need you." She didn't answer, but she didn't leave the porch. And when he stood, she reached up and took his hand without a word. 3 days after the standoff, the snow fell heavier. Garrett was mending a hinge in the barn, but his hand was stiff from the wound. Willa worked quietly beside him, oiling a worn bridle that had cracked near the bit. They hadn't said much since the shooting, not out of distance, just fatigue. The barn was warm with lantern light. Wind rattled the roof but stayed outside. Garrett reached for a rusted nail, missed it, winced. Willa moved closer and held the board steady. He let her. She didn't ask about the pain. He didn't ask about the silence. When the hinge held, she leaned her head against the stall rail for just a moment, breathing deep. He didn't speak, just placed a hand on her shoulder. Brief. Steady. No promises, no declarations. But she didn't step away. Later that week, Willa had walked into town for supplies. A letter waited at the Mercantile postmarked Ohio, addressed to her old name. It was from an old schoolmate, married, a mother. 4 children, judging by the ink-sketched faces in the corner. Willa folded it without finishing and slipped it into her coat. As she left, she passed the doctor's wife with a swaddled infant in her arms. The baby gripped the woman's collar with tiny fingers, yawning like a fox kit. Willa didn't stop walking. But that night, she sat on the porch longer than usual, coat wrapped tight, a kettle gone cold beside her. She stared out at the dark pasture, one hand unconsciously resting on her belly. Inside, Garrett lit the lamp and set 2 cups on the table without calling her in. A week after the marriage, Willa rode into Dry Creek for flour and lamp oil. The air was sharp and brittle with frost. She walked past the millinery, where 2 women stood at the window arranging ribbons. "She married him, sure," one whispered, looping velvet into a bow. "But no ring, no name change, no cake, no kiss." "Doesn't feel like a marriage to me," the other said. "Feels like she bargained her way in." Willa kept walking, jaw set. She stepped into the general store and set down her ledger for Cain Ridge. The shopkeeper frowned. "Didn't know Cain was sending someone else." "He didn't," she said flatly. The man hesitated, then nodded and rang up the items. She took the supplies in silence, her back straight, boots echoing sharp on the floorboards. Outside, she caught her reflection in the glass. Hair wind-tossed, eyes tired, but her spine never bent. And when she rode home, she did not mention any of it to Garrett. The snow kept falling after the standoff, soft and steady, as if the land were trying to quiet what had passed. The boundary fence stood mended and watched, quiet as the land it guarded. Boone was gone. Word spread he'd been shot in the leg, bled bad, and his men dragged him south toward the New Mexico line. The sheriff in Dry Creek called it exile by way of consequence. No trial, no return. No one came to challenge the Cain name after that. Willa found herself humming some mornings. Not songs, she remembered, just sound to fill the quiet.